Great. So the first talk is called the discipline. And this is something that we are struggling to understand since we first encountered this word like many years ago, right? Like, what is the discipline and why is that kind of important? For us as kind of young designers, architects, we keep hearing this word everywhere, to discipline.
Yeah, and it seems like one of those words that has that always incites extremely strong reactions. It's either a blatant yes or a blatant no on the other side as well, and always somehow aggression is attached to the yes or no to it.
Right.
Yeah, and this is something that for us as contemporary architects, it seems very strange because. As far as I'm concerned, the way things are going about right now, there's disciplines seem to be dissolving in many ways, but perhaps we can go about it more in detail later.
What is the discipline when you think about it? What is it?
So it seems like a very strong pedagogical move towards training architects and towards the production of expertises of distinct kind. And that distinct kind in this case would be the architectural kind.
Right. So it's really literally like the eternal discipline of Kung Fu or something, where you where you kind of have to go through many years of training to understand like the core, somehow the essence of something, but no one is quite sure, or at least there are different schools of thought of what that is, I think, right? I mean,
and then this super famous, by now famous anecdote of Peter Eisenman and Jeff Kipnis talking at a review at the Angewandte. And then Peter Eisenman says, "No, you can't teach architecture." And then Kipnis steps in and says, "Oh, of course you can. I can. Maybe you can."
Yeah, seems like it's also very personal.
Yeah.
In a way, this kind of understanding, like what we can do, what we cannot do. But yeah, let's go through the list that you have. I think, for me personally, maybe this idea of drawing as an expertise, or at least as a way of thinking about the world, would be maybe or at least for me, that was the entry into the idea of the discipline, right? So what does it mean to draw? What does it mean to make something? What is the process of design? And then the other questions that come out of it, like what is the subjectivity of the designer? How do we talk about that part of it, like expression or kind of specificity? And so these are some questions that I would have for this, basically. And then obviously all these other some other things that come out, right? Like the problem of the contemporary, something that is happening right now, and how you manage that with this kind of historical almost obligation. Is obligation the right word for this, do you think?
Yeah, completely. I think it comes part and parcel with it being called the discipline. So it is really disciplining oneself. It's really getting trained in a very strict kind of almost like a military school.
Right.
Strict separations between things, strict instructions on how to do things. Yeah, and it seems like, at least for us, I guess, that drawing is attached directly to the discipline. Whenever this comes along, then the idea of representations, then the idea of the medium itself in which architecture can or cannot be expressed, it steps in. But I want to, maybe one way to go about it, that's my current mode of thought in terms of drawing, that during the Renaissance, when I guess you can clearly say that drawing was invented as a tool, or as a motive tool for architecture. I think it was more related to establishing a sense of rationality. And then some references that you can also find in what's he called? Yeah, the projective cast by
Robin Evans.
Robin Evans. Yeah,
Right.
you find the examples like the map of Imola by Leonardo da Vinci, the Campo Marzio, the Nolli map, etc. What they're really trying to do is do an overlay of rationality on top of whatever is that is real. And it's essential, I think, to understand that drawing is never an underlay, which I think is the kind of problematic way to go about it. This becomes along the lines of a religious or even dogmatic approach, but these are always overlays of rationality over which you can enact a kind of dance. So it's really like establishing up of a space, construction of a space where you can perform this task, which is called architecture.
And this is interesting when you say underlay versus overlay, because that makes me think of when I read Vasari, the lives of famous kind of painters, architects, and sculptors. He talks about this idea of diseño or design or drawing, literally, as being what comes first for the painter, for example. Something that comes before painting is diseño, right? You have this like sketch of, or at least you have like an idea of where the figures are and how the space is laid out through the perspectival construction, right? So that almost you can say that there is a reading of that where it is literally drawing, literally is the underlay for design, right? Something that comes before kind of designing, and it serves these two purposes. One is to maybe map the real, as in the case of what you're talking about, cartography and this idea of kind of producing maps. But the other idea is that it comes kind of before what is to come, something that is to come, or the finished like work or something like this. And I'm kind of curious about that also today, right? This is what we're talking about. This kind of historical references always serve to like really give us a prompt of thinking about what we are doing today and how that we can understand this as an outcome of that history, I think.
Yeah, and this, one other point that I think is important is that when we talk about this overlay, which eventually becomes an underlay for design, I think it's important to see that it's not merely or not only pictorial. I think, because it's everything that you can every kind of verb or adjective that you can attach to drawing, I think you can easily attach to any kind of thought as well. Drawing lines of rationality, drawing conclusions, drawing separations, drawing partitions, etc. So these can always, I think, be shifted into modes of thinking and domains where rationality lies at the very core of them.
Right.
And this is where I think the discipline of architecture as we know it related to drawings, I think it shifts completely to a pictorial tradition. And then it becomes, then suddenly it becomes important for the medium of expression becomes important. Way more than the idea that you need to construct lines. No matter if it's on paper or in text or however.
But for me, what I was thinking about right now when you said that is I remember this kind of water drawings by Leonardo. When he tries to understand how water works through the drawing, and this is maybe this idea of kind of attaching rationality to this expressive. Or at least kind of trying to map the natural forces you cannot understand because it's always shifting. And then you kind of develop a technique of capturing, and it's not a moment in time. It's not meant to serve as a photo of that water kind of thing, but it's meant to serve as almost like a diagram of kind of what they would say in the 90s, like the diagram of becoming of that water body, right? But it's interesting that this is, I mean, this is the perfect kind of example for me, at least. Like, it's a combination of that rational mapping, but also it's an expressive, artistic. There is an artistic intent, like whether you like it or not, right? Or I mean, how Leonardo would think about it, that's a different problem, I think, you know. But for us, at least culturally speaking, this becomes like an expression somehow, this like entanglement between him, the nature, and the medium, right? So it becomes this dancing between these different, you know, modes of being almost, and the drawing kind of becomes that expression of that moment, or the procedure. You know, and I think it's really like that's very different than what kind of, to come back to the question of pedagogy. You know, how architects are taught to draw, which is this completely rational endeavor, basically, right? Or today it's kind of subsumed into software, and we are already, you can guarantee through software it's going to work like that, right? But it's not like, I feel like we need to win back that space of dancing. And you said that word too, like dancing between these things. I really like that. There is a performative aspect to it too.
Yeah, absolutely right. And if we even talk about architecture as a particular mode of thought, I think this would be the thing, this idea of dancing between these two states of mapping, and these two states of cartography, of rationality, and on the other side of projection, of construction, of expression, as well, as you said. Yeah, this is where I would probably distinguish it from art in general, where it suddenly shifts into this kind of interaction with the real. So it's not the pure expression, but the expression in conversation, in communication with the real. Yeah, and this is what we see, these two modes of thinking. I think we can, if we look at schools of architecture, we can kind of clearly distinguish them between these two poles. Yeah, perhaps in the US, the East and the West Coast, you know, that's super clear. But then also the way architecture is taught, it's taught both in technical universities and in art schools, and it's very telling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least we come from the art school almost background to some degree, but we also have the other background, which is the engineering one, right? But I mean, that's something that is always going to be there. This kind of, or not a split, but a difference between these different poles of engagement. But so maybe the bigger question for me today, when you talk about that, would be like, okay, so do we still need to always follow that exact same route of like how people are taught in the age of like cognitive technologies and the advent of AI, and basically this idea that this modes of rational thinking that you were talking about are already kind of embedded in the tools that we use, you know, and this is something that we spoke about many times, this idea that when you work in software, when you kind of work with these kind of advanced technical tools, right, you're exposed, you're kind of always already inside that space of rationality. You're working with a representation of that universal space of modernity, right? Like this idea of the grid, and how that is a default. That becomes a default of what we're dealing with. So when we know that, or when we kind of, or at least like there is we have a intuitive understanding of it, even maybe though we are not able to really understand it fully. But when we have this understanding, we still need to train people to be rational, exclusively rational actors in the world, or what is the new training? Or not training, but what is the new thinking about that? What do you think?
Yeah, this is a good question, and I think I should add here. No, I think this is the major shift today because yeah, now it almost seems like we don't really need to understand the kind of operative models of how things work, but we need to be able to suggest what they should look like and how what they should achieve, right? And then this is super clear in all of these machine learning and AI applications, that really the model is something that is constructed, that is automatically constructed. All that needs to be told to the machine is what to do. And this,
Right.
I would completely suggest that this is a complete shift from logics to rhetorics. You know, and in terms of thinking, in terms of the cycles of history, this would then be the shift between the Renaissance and the Baroque. The Renaissance is about mapping. The Renaissance is about this construction of rational thought. And then the Baroque just plays it and plays it beautifully. Yeah.
Right. Right. So it becomes about pure expression because the tools are already there almost. I mean, not maybe not pure expression, but it becomes about like these other modes of thinking that are less. The final outcome is less clear, maybe, or it's less. You can map it. You cannot map it to the origin by one-to-one, almost like you can in the Renaissance. There is a certain clarity that is lost, but something else is gained. And but now this is becoming really complex also, because if you think about the idea of an author becoming subsumed under these forces of automation, but not only automation, that's one aspect of it. Like the other aspect is the user paradigm, right? That comes from software. This idea that you're using something and that you're being used by something and that your desires are playing out, which is the larger debate about the internet and like what happened with the internet, the tragedy that befell internet kind of changed from the space of utopia to the super mall that we have today, you know, and this idea of like, I mean, mind control is a strong word, but I mean, there is an aspect of like basically playing the emotional manipulation that happens through software. And I think one thing that architecture or any design software is kind of free, at least now from, is this like manipulative like part, right, which you're exposed to when you go to any other platform.
Yeah.
But then the real manipulation is that space of rationality is still possible, I think, which is presented to you through the interface, right? You're presented by this space of rationality that you can conquer, right? You're the Albertian author, like someone outside of that space looking in and having this. Everything is set for you. The table is set, right? But
yeah,
what do you think? Is that like, I don't know. I feel like that's a question also to me.
Yeah, this is definitely a pitfall, and that you see architectural practices, they fall very easily into it because it's extremely productive. It's extremely lucrative to stick to an expertise and keep producing. But I think in terms of education, it all these tools need to be seen as toys, huh? Because the
Right.
game is already given to you by Autodesk or by, I don't know, Mr. McNeil or whatever his name is.
Right.
They're yeah. So we're merely players within this game, and I think it becomes interesting when 2 or 3 different games are put together in this context. When you use ZBrush and you use Rhino and then you use Photoshop and then you use another one, suddenly the space expands, and then it's no longer so damaging to learn these softwares or to operate within them. But what does, I think, damage completely is the expertise of a particular one, because then it becomes constricting and kind of suffocating, at least for myself. I mean, yeah, that's how I see it.
But imagine like in the industry, like BIM is becoming this model, or it has become this model of engagement with the world.
Yeah. And this is, yeah.
I mean, what does it say about architecture? I mean, this is something I was thinking a lot about, you know. and maybe, and this is my reading, right? This is my kind of what I'm trying to understand as a historical move of the discipline, which I'm increasingly suspicious that there is a discipline, actually. This is, I think we can talk about this later, but the historical move of that was, to me at least, it becomes the question, you know, when you talk about the Renaissance, or when you talk about architects, historical kind of examples, there was an intention towards cosmology, right? There was kind of a cosmological mind at work, something that is someone, or that is thinking about the world in its totality, that is thinking about like what is the expression of the world, and how does architecture kind of not represent that, but kind of engage with that, you know. And see, it seems that in the 20th century, what happened was that this kind of modernity model of that has solved architecture as a housing problem, or as a, you know, as a problem of this kind of minor questions that are historically minor, but they're major locally speaking, you know, when you look at it like. And then that's one aspect of it, and then the desire was solved through like advertising, through the Madison Avenue kind of subsuming modernity into this like model of like mid-century modern and magazines and all that stuff, and you know, it became, and then technologically it was kind of solved by the Neufert model of kind of packaging architecture into manageable, repeatable kind of forms. And now this is BIM, you know, you can become an architect by learning Revit, and because it's given to you, there is a default that is given to you. And what happened to cosmology? There is no one thinking about this anymore. You know, we have like, or few people are thinking about this. Is that a question?
To think of the what we call the first digital turn in architecture.
Right.
Because now the more and more I see those drawings. Yeah, because it was a lot of exploration of drawings as well, at least within the people that we were operating with. It's very clear that the drawings are there and they work very well, because it was the construction of systems.
Right.
And it was the question was precisely how things work, rather than what we need to do.
Right.
All these this idea of the diagram as the motive force of architecture, and that you let it run amok, you know, a kind of engine that can produce as many forms as possible, but with the possibility of retaining its invariant unit of production. Yeah? And I think this just because we kind of lose and BIM is precisely the kind of complete packaging of that in one thing.
Right.
Really precisely what needs to be done is there. How things work is there completely. And this is where I see where we are. It's a completely different question, because we don't really need to know how things work at all. So drawings, I think that's the point where they started leaking out and going a bit towards computer graphics, because the idea of how things work was not a problem anymore.
Right.
Like
it was solved.
When we started teaching, that's what we were doing as well, I think. We were killing away this kind of scientific illustrations and moving towards things that look good.
Yeah, things that look good, because we wanted to kind of, I think, to give expression to something that is still not there. Yeah. This other way of thinking, which says like, okay, now we have technology. Why does it have to look like that? Which always annoyed me a lot, and still annoys me when I look at any stuff that comes from parametric kind of, or this idea of like the digital, because, you know, it's we spoke about this many times. It's kind of like saying that it's solving all these problems, and that it's kind of following up on this kind of second or third modernity wave, like that's going to automate everything and solve this problem. But eventually, what I've seen in all the reviews that I've been to, in all their lectures, in all their exhibitions everywhere. It's just this desire for aesthetics that was incompatible with what they were saying and how they were describing the project as a rational kind of apotheosis of rationality or the hyper-rational. Right? There was a deeply human kind of desire there to produce beautiful things, and almost every project kind of ended with that. And you can see that that is really what they wanted, you know. But they were denying this desire because it was not supposed to be part, and they're still doing that, some of them, you know. Like they don't want to talk about aesthetics. It's stupid. You know, there's this argument too, like, oh, it's stupid to talk about. No, it's not. You know, I mean, this is what we discussed many times. Why is it stupid to talk about aesthetics? Are you kidding me? Like, I mean, this is part of what we are interested in. Like, what are new forms of worlding that we can produce? What are new forms of engagement with the world? It's part of this. Like Rancière would say that this is what comes before you can make the world intelligible. You have to make it sensible. You have to give expression to something, right? And then maybe it's weird, or maybe it doesn't really work, or something like this. But it comes close to that, you know.
Yeah. And even this, yeah, this is what's very strange, and I think this happened during the Enlightenment. This construction of the disciplines, etc., and then there's this kind of strict mode of thought, and then towards modernity, then it shifts to optimization and the production of products, of goods, etc., etc. So it has to be functioning, it has to be rational as well. And then you see in the Renaissance or the Baroque, it's so there's always this idea of the logic that is there in terms of the plan, generally speaking, right? But then you have the section, and you have the perspective as well, which is, yeah, this is what I found so enlightening by reading Robin Evans, how he talks about perspective. And how this can actually be a register through which you can measure things with Piero della Francesca,
right?
You know, with his heads. Because
the other method, right? It's like a fully separate formal system that he made up, but that was somehow working for him, which is kind of fascinating, you know, because I mean, it means that if you have a self-contained formal system, it's going to actually produce results no matter what.
Yeah.
And like this, and this is interesting today because you have maybe a proliferation of these formal systems everywhere that work. The problem, when I come to this now point, you know, it's like, it doesn't mean anything culturally, what we do. All of this talk, all of this high theory that now we can just go through because we kind of are versed in it, and we are kind of schooled whatever it, and we can find people to talk about it, but it doesn't really, man, it doesn't mean anything. That's the problem. This is why I wanted to show you this letter from Jacques Herzog to David Chipperfield, and we can talk about this also a bit later, right? It doesn't. We are paralyzed. This is what I find for myself also. In some ways, that we are paralyzed by this obligation to the discipline, by this obligation to history, by this obligation to discourse, by the obligation to each other that we have to kind of maintain this focus on somehow these larger forces of history. And then when you talk to anyone outside our circle or someone that we know, they don't know about it, they don't care about it. They never heard about it, and after 5 minutes, they might lose completely interest in what we're talking about, you know. So
not interesting at all. It's like a barista talking about how he makes coffee, or it's like I don't know, whatever, like a cobbler talking about how they make shoes. And this is, I really blame the discipline for that. You know?
Me too.
And this is something that I really I'm happy about it extremely. That I think it's now going away. It's completely getting dissolved in in this overtaking of AI and machine learning?
I hope so. This is what I hope. I hope so. But can I just show you this letter? I think it's pretty amazing. It's just an incredibly interesting document for our times. You know, I guess that in the chief of I have no idea what happened, but I'm just speculating here. I guess he wrote to John Kelso with these questions of what should we do about Corona? What should we do about Black Lives Matter? Social inequality, what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? Right? Everyone is talking about this today. So here's what he says. Dear David, you asked me what we architects should do about the unmistakably impending environmental catastrophe, about social inequality, about poverty, about the degradation of this planet's resources, about the pandemic, which has placed us in an almost surreal moment that begs description, all of which is being managed by political leaders whose cynicism and absurd actions put the Marx brothers to shame. Dear David, the answer is nothing. Right? it's amazing. This letter is amazing. And why he says that, it's even more amazing, because he says, do you know of any moment in the history of architecture in which an architect contributed to decisive issues of society? Can architecture actually change anything or anticipate anything? For example, in the art world. Then he talks about Tate Modern that they built and how that enabled this amazing upsurge of art, and but it also enabled like the massive commercialization of everything, of every single kind of related issue in the art world, right? But the most damning, for me at least, and everyone should read this, I think it's an amazing letter, right? But the most damning and interesting bit is when he starts talking about writing and discourse. And here is exactly that point. He says, so we can do something after all. And architects want to do something, they want to take action. But then he says, very few of us are intellectuals, although many see themselves as such. Even fewer can write. And if they do write, if their writing turns into books, they will at best attract attention in architectural magazines and universities. The more versed they are in generating catchy phrases as PR for themselves, the more successful they will be in steering the way they think. And then he says here, we're so fascinated with Rossi's architecture of the city. We thought Venturi's complexity was the greatest thing. And architects after World War II trembled in variation of Corbusier's argument. And what has survived? Nothing. Not a single impetus for today. This is what I would say nostalgia. What survived is nostalgia, but not a single impetus for today. That's true. That is true. I'm sorry. this is true. What he's saying here is true. We are fooling ourselves. No one read these books anymore. And if you read them either because you have to, or because you're nostalgic and you want to cling to that idea of meaning that was somehow reflected in that text. And I think it's just an amazing kind of insight. Obviously, I mean, he's Jacques Herzog. Who's gonna have insight if he doesn't? But it's just an amazing thing. It's an amazing document of our times. I think that because everywhere you go now, on every social media platform, be that whatever, Instagram, which we use the most, Twitter. I mean, architects don't use Twitter, which is interesting. Some do, but most don't. And Facebook, which is I mean, horrifying to think about, but everywhere you go, you see these calls to action somehow, as if we are like activists, as if we're supposed to have now these kind of answers to these like massive questions that just came out yesterday. Now everyone is a COVID-19 expert. It's the same way. Everyone is an AI expert now. Everyone knows everything about algorithmic governance, and not to mention that everyone is a games expert. Minecraft, you got it. Animal Crossing, no problem. We know what it is.
Mario. insane.
Mario, Super Mario in architecture. Yes, please give us more. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. I'm sorry. It's just, I mean, you know, it's kind of like, it's depressing actually, if you think about it. Not that I don't want to be depressed. This is not, I mean, we are talking about this exactly so that we can express.
Yeah, okay. I have to read the whole thing. I think I fell asleep while reading it. That's sad afterwards. But yeah, I have to read it because what you read out right now sounds very melancholic
Yes, that's right.
and yeah, I don't see any comedy there, you know.
There is no comedy, but there is something there, which,
But you know, still.
no, I agree. I think you're totally right. It's not very, I mean, they're Swiss, so probably they don't have much that sense of humor thing that everyone was talking about. But, you know, I think like I mean, that this intro, when he says the answer is nothing, I think that's exactly right for a certain kind of practice that you can call architecture. But it's not right for these new practices where we are talking about environmental crises and gains and all these other ways of thinking. But these are not disciplinary practices, actually, if you think about it. The stuff that we do.
And I couldn't be gladder for it.
Yeah.
And it's really, yeah, I mean, the more I think about, especially, for example, the kind of disciplinary stronghold that somebody like Kipnis has, you know, or had. I don't know if anymore or not. I'm not following that trend anymore. He's not trending anymore. But this really makes me furious because it's really the production of people who can do certain things very well and lack any abstraction whatsoever from life. They might as well be you know, craftsmen, very very skilled craftsmen or craftswomen, but they weren't that.
Okay.
And these are the people who actually taught us as well, a lot of them.
Yes. No, I think you're totally right. They don't have the understanding of
Yeah.
you cannot just talk about this new reality. You cannot just try to point at it. You have to like implement the question into how you teach and how you work as well.
Yeah.
You know, and this is something that I feel it's like missing from everywhere you look at. It's just this. There is a reflexive response, almost like a reflex. Like you poke a limb or an animal, they kind of respond. That's what's happening with these questions about COVID. Now everyone wants to talk about COVID and wants to make 3D prints masks and stuff, you know, stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, that's not the issue here. The issue is like, how do we do something?
Some attention for some kind of some attention from what do you call it? Some confirmation of life on the other side.
Exactly.
And it's super telling as well. The kind of disciplinary schools that we know of, slowly a lot of the practices have the larger practices have moved out of them. You know, now it's always these small kind of artisanal offices that function within these schools.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those many signs that we discussed just now.
I agree. I think the artisanal practice is the most, and this is sadly what happened with my favorite office, Moss Architects, you know, which really, and we like them. I know that you like them as well. And when you see what happened to them, this is it. This is somehow I saw just recently the last post they had on Instagram, some kind of house they're making, really kind of beautiful, but really well made and really funny in a way. But the representation looks like something from the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the clients they have now are kind of understanding that language, and they're understanding this, like, there is something deeply depressing about that, but there is also the celebration.
I understand. This was super depressing as well with Moss. How at one point, I think at the release of their one of their books. I can't remember the second one that came out. They redrew all their drawings in the same style. This was really just, it
This
was
is
like,
it. This was the depth of that worldview, which was so amazing because they make software. You remember when you first saw there is an architecture office that makes software, but it's not Patty Schumacher. It's not like trying to rape you with that drill. I always remember this. Like there is a Japanese film that I'm going to show you. It's like called Tetsuo Iron Man. He tries to rape like a girlfriend. He starts growing metal from his body, and then there is like a massive drill coming out of his like nether regions at some point, which kind of symbolically replaces this idea. This is how I thought about like what we were taught in school. This like parametric madness of like going to the gym and pumping yourself until your kind of veins on the like start popping up. And then we saw Moss, which was like, oh my God, the art is back, the beauty is back, everything is back.
It looked cute, somewhat cute, but very beautiful all the same, always. Yeah, and messy,
And messy.
not this refined metallic rhino look that
Yes.
we were told to replicate over and over again and to perfect, no less.
Yes. This was the, and then we discovered that it's called informal, that there is a history. Back to Duchamp, back to Georges Bataille, back to all these like figures that were thinking outside of that kind of like modernist scaffold that kind of produces useful idiots eventually. Then what happened, exactly as you said, 2000, I don't know, 15, 16, they redrew all their drawings in the style of Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, which is that's a tragedy, man. I'm sorry. This is like some when some boomer will tell you, oh, I cried when Jimi Hendrix died or something. I don't know. For us, I mean, for me, this was that was the because you understood this is it. And they produced so many amazing young kind of practitioners as well, right? Most of them that are kind of we know them, right? But it's interesting that this happened. And also the world changed at that point, I think, which is we went from this era of early maybe Web 2.0 where there was still a consensus, right? And then we kind of exploded into today, which is a different
choice of style is super interesting. I mean, yeah, it's very depressing in Moss's case. When you can do any style, any time, any construction, any, I don't know, any kind of representation or any kind of drawing, this is the one you choose. Really, what possibly could be the story to go to this? It's almost like a masochistic case, huh?
I think it's the clients. They started having these bourgeois clients in New York. Probably have no idea, and it doesn't. I mean, but this is how they project into it. And then they needed to kind of have a language for them that is still kind of cool for the younger generations. It's actually a problem, right? It was a design problem for them. Like, how do we persuade clients while still talking to the younger people that we can kind of have in our landscape? Funnily enough, like what we were doing is, to my mind, still one of the really close readings of Moss work, and I don't think they even know about it. But it totally, I think it's really interesting in that way that it was kind of like a rise and fall, and we kind of were there to observe it from the shadows, which I really like. And like you said, the shadows and being invisible, like a platform, right? Becoming a platform, which is something that I would say that it's a disciplinary problem that was fairly invisible until a couple of years back, and there are many different ways of talking about it right now. From people, they talk about planetarity and these kind of notions to more our side that comes from somehow it's more like drawing, discipline, engagement. I think.
No, but it's really, yeah, that as well. I think it's priceless, the kind of drawing tradition that we stepped into,
Yes.
because it's something that you can completely trace. You can see the cycles that have gone around it, and people who have run around it, and all of these stories that we know about. So I'm really happy that we were trained in that rather than the other side of the equation. You know, the kind of social housing reform, this, that, wow, group
Oh,
aid.
yeah. Activism crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, there is another part of that too, which is that we are coming from our backgrounds where we had the propensity to kind of detect bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, especially like, and I know that you would say the same. Me coming from Serbia, you know, when I saw all of that stuff and what it produces throughout the years, it produces nothing, and it also does. The only purpose of that is a social one, you know, to kind of like give you more power within a certain circle of people that you want to, but the effect of that is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, and even if it does work, then it's even more problematic, because then we're in the realm of social engineering, which
Yes.
is way more problematic. This is Facebook 101. They can just do it.
Well, precisely that. I mean, if this activist side of architecture would come even close to something like that, they would need actual technical knowledge, which they don't have.
Yeah.
This is something, you know, that's the most damning critique of that, because they wish they could do what Facebook can do, but they can't. They don't have the technical skills to do that. That's the truth of it. The best they can do is like be parasites on that body and like point.
Yeah.
You know, most of that stuff is just pointing. So look at that. I mean, look at any text by these people. It's all about pointing. Zero idea of how to propose something. I mean, and those that do, they're actually interesting. But there is very few of them. This is like going back to Jacques' point in this letter, where he says like, oh, it's all about like texts that no one reads and no one cares about, which I agree with.
Yeah.
But you know, also Adil, I mean, if you remember this, like you and me were the last guys to care about technology and to care about at the very beginning when we met. We were talking only about politics and only about these kind of questions that are not technical. You know, so I you know, it's kind of like interesting that we had to go through this education and largely also, like, to be fair, this is like we are self-taught in this. Like no one actually taught us to write code and to make apps and to work with software and to do stuff like this. I mean, we kind of taught ourselves because we thought it was important.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it was at that point, I think it was low-hanging fruit for us, you know, because we could kind of grasp it, and we could see that there are ways, but it's not really working out somehow. But then slowly it got more and more damaging, not just through the kind of brainwashing of the discipline, but in general. I mean, if you become, as you said, with our backgrounds, there's no trust is not handed out easily. So it's really, it became super clear the kind of intentions and the pitfalls of these people, and it's very clear there the individuals are always kind of these charismatic, powerful characters.
The discipline is still almost like used in a religious way.
Yeah.
To kind of like when you think.
Yeah, and I think especially now with this kind of the coming back of online teaching, you know, and these platforms like Khan Academy, these platforms like I don't know, Coursera and this and that, they're really hacking away at the whole idea of an institute. Not just that, but specifically a disciplining institute. You know, I think these are super interesting models that we see today, because they're completely agnostic to particular modes of thought, because they teach all of them. There's no problems whatsoever. And then here it's problematic as well, because then in these kind of platforms, then they don't have much to say. They can only teach you that which has been established already.
Right.
So at the level of the platform, they hack away at the universities, but they have nothing to say, as opposed to universities themselves, you know, or the kind of universities that we would idealize, that they
Right.
would have some kind of
Uni-
and this and that. Yeah.
Universities that have something to say, and then once you get into that, becomes clear that they have something to say within that scope of what they're doing. But what they produce eventually is problematic, I think, at least to my understanding. Like, I don't know if you saw the Social Dilemma document. I mean, we can say this and that about it, right? Maybe it's kind of, but it's interesting. There is a moment there when they say, you know, 15 engineers or 15 designers actually were puppeteering billions of people through design, literally through how notifications work, through how likes work, and there was no theory behind this. There were many kind of half-baked theories, and if you actually probably. We should look into this, you know, but like if I'm assuming this, I'm jumping to conclusions now because we're architects and we are kind of naturally given to this discipline. I'm going to assume if you actually look at the theories that motivate these people, these designers at Facebook, Google, all these guys, it will be incredibly half-baked from our point of view. Yeah. Non-rigorous, dumb, in a way, right? That we would be very difficult to be persuaded by it. But it works. But it works. Nothing that we do works. Do you like whoever I talk to, and I'm sure it's the same with you. It doesn't work on that scale, not even close. It doesn't even work on a much smaller scale. Our ideas and the way that we are trying to persuade people, and the way that we are. It doesn't work. You know? For Schumacher, it works for a certain kind of person, the person that went to the AA and was kind of exposed to that drill, you know. And I know a few of those, and I'm sure that you do as well. You know, there is a certain cultish behavior there that was tied to the personal relations between people, to somehow peer networks, to public shaming, almost to these kind of behaviors that are very primitive when you compare them to the social engineering done at Facebook from this top level design to these platforms. I think
that's the funny part, you know, because if we relate these kind of engineers at Facebook, you know, working or hacking away at half-baked stuff, and then you compare it to universities, it's so striking how useless universities have become.
That's what I'm saying.
They're completely embroiled in the peer review process, and peer review, I really think it's worse than cancer. It's precisely there to completely kill content, because if you have content, you can't go to a conference.
Exactly, because you have to filter it through this.
If you can discuss niches, then you can go there, you know, and then that's the end of it. All journals are aggressive, you know, they give you positions if you get published. I mean, and the kind of processes she told me about writing an article, my God, it takes 2 years for you to get anything published after 20 million times of having revised it. Because they even told her, you know, you have too many ideas in this. You need to have one. So it's really an aggressive tearing down of content that we see in universities now, and all these journals are just, wow, terrifically bad.
That is exactly right. I mean, let's come back to the journal issue, especially to log later, because I know that we will have something to say about it. But I just want to dwell on this, what you said a little bit on this idea of content and production of kind of meaningful expression, right? Or something that makes sense, or some idea, right? And I think it's like a game of attrition, really, because you kind of mingle around with people and talk, and then many times you would hear some of the things that you're working on from someone else, and then suddenly it's published, right? And this happens a lot, right? This idea of like who gets to publish are people who are really have the stomach and the time to deal with this endless multiplication of bureaucracy. That everything has become this bureaucratic procedure now. Like you want to publish, you have to like write it in this way, and you need like 11 footnotes, right? And you have to format them in this way. And it's like, who has the time for that? Who are you talking to with this? What is this for? We have simple things to say. We are not.
Yeah, and it's a super incestual practice, because if you manage to stomach this idea of having to go through millions of this and that and be patient with crap like that, then you get published, and then you get a position through it. You get a professorship in these universities to repeat the cycle over and over again. And then you subject people to these things again and again. I mean, at ETH, I see it clearly within my own institute. I see some people struggling very much to communicate with anyone because they don't really care about it. I mean, it's a publicly funded university, so you have that luxury afforded to you. But then on the other side, you see some other chairs that are just so devoted to these journals and to this process that not only believe in it, but perform in it. And that's why they can get all the funding in the world. They can get all the bloody whatever. And now you see, even at ETH, what happened was after Corona hit, now if you address Corona in any way in a grants application, then you have a better chance of getting it out.
You got it. That's exactly what we were talking about before. It's incredible how this works. Like you have to be almost like an AI, right? To be able to devour all this stuff, but then turn it back into this format that is meant not for humans to read, almost. Right? Like the kind of the annotated. So how can you do that? I mean, this is literally, I think this calls for like setting up like a bot that can actually perform that for you. And or something like this. I mean, it's kind of like, it's ridiculous.
No, but it's a great idea. Actually, they did something like that at my chair, but it was related to architecture competitions. So they automated the production of buildings and then they won a second prize in a competition that was going to be built. And then they told them that this was automated and nobody liked it. They hated it because it killed everything. No, but this is a great idea. We should...
But even if you did that, it wouldn't be...
Oh, it's a cynical project.
It's a cynical thing. I don't want to do that. I mean, there's a precedent for that too. If you remember this from the 90s, we read about this like Alan Sokal affair. When this, you know this? Alan Sokal? He was a scientist, and then he wrote a kind of a nonsensical article and then published it in one of the kind of post-structuralist journals. And the intention was to show the kind of the meaninglessness, of that discursive line of thought, Derridian kind of relativistic approach to text and to meaning and all that. So, and it's an interesting way to kind of, but this is what Borat is doing. I mean, I just saw Borat too. He's kind of playing with this, and it's actually working on a societal level. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I,
It's incredible, actually. Some parts of it is extremely
I,
boring.
yeah, I have to be a
You know,
little.
I don't know, like,
Because I get depressed. I mean, I watch This Is America, and it's just pure preposterousness, and then
yeah.
you
Well, I mean, that's a story about this moment, and it just we can talk about this some other time. I think this idea of what happens politically and how that is related to here, but obviously this is deeply intertwined.
yeah,
And also specifically when you look at that documentary, The Social Dilemma, I think they're really hitting the nail on their head with this uh, way of thinking about today as being the outcome of this immense explosion of availability of information, but also availability of all kinds of different behavioral entanglements, right? Propagated by these platforms and kind of enabled, let's say, by Facebook, by these ways of communicating that are totally hypercharged, you know, in comparison to what we had before. And again, like, we are operating in that space as designers, but we are not able to. We are somehow floating in the limbo, right? Because we are not doing buildings, so we cannot like submit to Jack Herzog's position and say, oh, you know, it's meaningless. You know, let's just do your buildings.
yeah.
Because we're not doing buildings, right?
I get into this quite a lot because a lot of the time I feel like we're producing noise, just pure noise, adding to it, making tools maybe again and again, and then adding more to an already rich line.
Yeah.
And
I'm actually, I thought about my practice too. I'm making software toys. That's what I'm doing. This is somehow at the core of it. And then I read, Will Wright, obviously, who made like SimCity. And he was talking about that at the beginning of his career, like toys. But toys as a meaningful, and games as an idea, I think. Obviously, we're going to have a different episode for that. But I think it's an interesting way that we responded to this, which is somehow to focus on something that is a world, but it's a smaller world that you can model.
Yeah, and it's I think toys are not the world, I think toys are precisely those those objects that provides a way for you to interact with the world. So I think it's very different from a game because it works at a more abstract level, because with toys you can produce games.
Exactly.
But toys are super abstract, and I find them super fascinating, and this idea of non-games, etc. Yeah, but this we can discuss later on.
Right. But it's related to the discipline, because the discipline is some kind of a game, or at least collection of many games almost that are not. Some of them are obsolete. So this is maybe the point that I was trying to make to all these other incursions into whatever we were talking about. But this
condition, huh?
Some of them are nostalgic games, as if you could say, I'm going back to playing with like the wooden horse in today's world, and that's going to hold the kids' attention to, or that someone can learn something from that. I mean, it's a question. So I think this is maybe something to we can talk about next time also. But this is, or if you want, we can go back to the list. I wanted to ask you about this.
What?
Treatise versus theory.
Yeah. This is also interesting, and this is coming straight from my advisor Ludger. And then the thing is, a theory can be proved false or true.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I'm reading a lot of these treatises from the Renaissance, especially, and there's just no way to disprove it.
Yeah, they're not falsifiable, right?
Yeah, because it's not logic. It's rhetorics.
Yes, exactly. So in that way, it's a mode of, but it's rhetorics in the classical sense of like, right, but it's also something more. I think these kind of utterances that we are performing, they're supposed to invoke almost something in the world, almost as if by magic. I think there is a lot of magical thinking in that, almost like as if we're trying to summon like the forces into being, but they almost never come. They almost never come. Sometimes they come, I don't know, but it's fascinating that we are bound to this. Why are we bound to this? Why are we not, a question for you, why are we not making games literally and saying, okay, let's make, or why are we not making platforms literally? By saying, let's make it as simple as possible for the majority of people to understand. Yeah. Something I'm thinking about every day now. After going through the whole, procedure of understanding who, like, what is what and who is where, but yeah. I'm just fascinated by this fact that we have become almost like a local village theater in the planetary economy of things, and then the village is rarely visited. The village of architectural discipline, rarely visited, and it's in the swamps somewhere, and there is an air of mystique about it. But when people go there, they kind of are waiting.
Smells bad.
smells bad. It really smells bad. I think we need more clarity. I think we need people who are. So, what's your take on? There is a lot of these younger guys that are making memes, and they're claiming this becomes like an expression. I actually pretty like that. Becomes like an expression of design, right? Clearly, it is an expression of design. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, but I think, at least the ones that I know of, I think it's satirical and it's cynical. I see very little humor in that. It's pure satire, and it's the most they can attempt at is irony. But otherwise, I fail to kind of appreciate. I see that. So what's really great about it is that there is some way it has a lot of popularity. There's people dropping in from here and there, and people belonging to. Actually, that's not true. I was thinking of a more general population, but that's not true.
No, it's not. It's still a specialized audience.
Yeah, so it doesn't even do that, to appeal to any larger public. Yeah, so I take it back. I don't like it at all. It's cynical, and it's and there's very particular kind of what would you call it? Yeah, like you're sitting on a high horse, and then you're telling everyone you're stupid. This is how I see them. And memes in general, I think there's maybe 3 or 4 of them that are actually funny. Otherwise, it's always a mockery.
Yes.
From a high horse to a lower position.
Right. Yeah. But
where it could be? I think this is a super interesting question to find where humor is operating at any level. But yeah, I don't know. I think you have another angle in your mind about.
It's not an angle. I just think that memes are a fascinating expression, and this is like common knowledge by now. It's not anything smart, but even that, when we know that, it doesn't liberate us from the obligation to maybe think about them and try to understand how they work and why they're popular. Some of them, why some of them are not like working. But I think that it's one of those other relations to that we spoke about, like COVID. Memes. If you're not dealing with memes, you're somehow not in the know. Which is, so it just begs the question of like, why not actually make memes? As you're saying, why not actually make that as a practice? Why do we have to make memes about architectural design?
Yeah.
Why do we have to make games about architectural design?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I get now what I mean.
Because,
Whatever I do it because I like buildings. You know, I really like buildings. So I would that's the only reason why I stick to this, because I need
buildings.
that. Yeah, I need that kind of intelligence, and this is what I'm shifting again towards after my kind of this dawning of the kind of nakedness or the discipline was revealed to me. Then I'm more and more towards practice. You know, I'm definitely going to start an office sooner or later,
Right,
if in the city for longer,
right,
or who knows, you know. But
right, right.
this is
My,
what I'm kind of getting into. Yeah.
mm, my answer is because I like drawing.
Uh-huh.
Historically speaking, this is what I really like. I like the idea of drawing. I like this as a language, as a history, as a culture, and I think what specifically what I'm doing is a continuation of that with other means. But that's still not enough, I guess, because the question of building is always going to come. And personally, this is what I'm thinking about always. I don't want to be in that camp, like Libius Woods camp or something like, it's not really, I'm not interested in that, right? It's like, oh, there's a style of that. It's a drawing style. And then this is like, there are books you can look at. And this is boring, actually. Historically, it's boring because there are many better. I mean, I like Mobius more than I like Libius Woods by 1,000 times. But, there are people who actually draw, or like Jack Kirby, people who actually draw comics or something, or illustrations. And then you have people who are like us who are bound to this, and who can see there is always like a ray of light coming from the darkness, and we can see like, oh, this is where we need to go. To follow that, right? It becomes like a navigation through the, and it's fun, and it's kind of interesting, and then it's empowering because you start thinking about the world in a different way. I think that's what's beautiful about architecture education. It's really giving you this like different angle at the world, and it's a different kind of thinking that's amazing, right? And I think that's what is the product, right? And this is for me the product, this way of thinking, and that is somehow, and that's what we are failing to convey to the audience somehow. And if we could do that, we could say, look, our way of thinking is actually what could be appropriate to untangle some of these global issues right now. Right? It's becoming this kind of game of and some people are trying to do that, obviously, different ways, but not enough, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's there's a reason why software architects are called software architects, right? And then there's so this kind of really struck me because it's really not. So if there are software architects, or if there are machine architects, and if there are building architects, which is us, then
right.
it cannot be a discipline. Huh? If this knowledge travels so much, then it's really, then you see the just the idea of making connections. You see that in philosophy, how you're connecting points, and you see the perspective as well built alongside.
Right.
Themes, explicitly. You see that in every piece of fiction you read.
You mean making these lateral analogies and connections and saying this is like that, and exactly this is what Ungers was writing about in that book, that small book called City Metaphors, where he says this is what we are good at. We can find connections between things that are not visible to other, but the discipline is too harsh a word for that. This is more like an approximative knowledge or a way of thinking that is more about approximation. It's not as rigorous. Really, it's not as rigorous as people want it to be. Sorry to interrupt you.
It kind of has to be not solid. It has to be fragile. It seems.
Yes.
It has to break if it's tested against things. And this is also where the treatise comes in.
Right.
Because theories have to be solid. Theories have to stand. If they're not, then they're out of the game. But a treatise works almost like a piece of fiction, which is delicate in its understanding, because you can only appreciate it. It can only be appreciated if people appreciate it. If they like what they hear. But it's really not. You can't break. It can move away from grace very quickly. It can fall from grace very quickly because it doesn't matter. It's a person talking about something. And
do you think that what you were talking about, this idea that we are now, if you want to write seriously, right, you have to write seriously, becomes this like meat grinder of pushing the text through this meat grinder that I'm convinced is made by non-writers and bad writers in order to kind of purge any quality from the text until it becomes almost like a machine readable thing. But is that like we are doing treatises but pretending to do theory, which I think is incredibly harmful, to be honest, and dishonest and harmful.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this underlay versus overlay thing. I think theses understand themselves as overlays on reality, and theories understand themselves as underlays to the world. And this is how it is. In a theory, that's what's proclaimed, that this is the way history has worked, and this is the way things have progressed, and this is something you should use from now on. But a treatise is so clearly personal that there's no, it cannot be disconnected from the person as well. Yeah, that would be another difference, I think. With a theory, it can be somehow disconnected.
One wild speculation that I have about this is that this is the fault of historians of architecture. And first, if you just think about it, first, how come there's so many historians of architecture everywhere? Where do they come from? Why do we need so many historians of architecture? That's my first thought always. Once upon a time, you had just a few people that were really interested in this. Now it becomes more like, what can I do about this? And problem is, man, people have too much time in their hands. And they're not really interested in these things. But after 40, 50 years of that, you get a layer of historians who have now taken upon themselves to decide what is good writing, as if you can guarantee somehow the ideas through this bureaucratic bullshit that they're pushing. You can get
the funny part, the kind of books that we appreciate about architects, by architects, about architecture, even though they might have very little friction. After Corbusier, that was the most popular one, I think. But then they're all such beautifully written books. Like Ventura, Brown, they're just beautifully written. Kulas, everything is beautifully written.
Yes.
10 years ago.
There is poetry there. Kohlhaas is people misread Kohlhaas. I swear, that's poetry. What he's writing, actually, it's not journalism. That's just there is something active in that writing. There is something alive. There is something very smart, looking around, making connections, unraveling things. There is a poetic element, and I think you're totally right. If you read Corbusier, this is pure creative approach to things. It's not dead. It's not. It wasn't how do you say it? Mutilated by this right? I don't know. Like, do you know if any
Right.
contemporary text that does that? I mean, it's very difficult. Very difficult. Like, you read something and you have to. That's why I don't read blog anymore. For example, I'm sorry to say it, which I thought was a brilliant. It's still, in many ways, it's a brilliant institution of like for ideas. But when you read that nowadays, you're like, what is this? Where
Yeah.
is that? Where is that core? Or it always depends on the people eventually. And you're totally right. It's individual. It depends on the people. It's always comes back to this like personal investment. It cannot be mandated because you went to a school to become an architectural historian doesn't mean you're a historian. Right? You understand? People misunderstand that still. And now, and the funniest thing is that they think they can influence ideas. That's hilarious, right? Like this is actually hilarious.
Yes. I mean, I know at ETH we have people studying concrete in the 60s, art historians, architecture historians. I'm like, really, man, really, what will you discover that's not on Wikipedia anymore?
No, exactly.
No, and it's this is also that's super funny that there's these two camps, one completely anti-technology, which is the historians, and then the other one purely technocratic.
Yes.
And I see that so clearly at ETH because we have the GTA, the History and Theory Department of Architecture, and imagine this: they put history and theory together.
Right. No, but everyone does. Everyone does now. This is the kind of unintended consequence of that approach. Now it's like history and theory. It comes together, no problem. As if that is the same, right?
So
But just
and then on the other side, there is the Institute of Technology and Architecture, and there's a small bridge that connects these two. Yeah, you've been there, but it's so striking. My God, you go from one to the other, and otherwise you're just cold and dying of the cold in the middle of the bridge. So these are the two camps you need to associate yourself with.
but
Only one. Yeah.
I mean, even the historians that work with technology or that are interested in technology, like Mario Carpo, or someone like this, the problem there is that it needs to be theorized already for them. They don't, or at least the Carpo does that a little bit. I have to say, I think he has brought some original theories, I think, into how we think about it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, what about things that are still emerging, or that are not even visible, that are like, I remember like there was a talk at the SciArc just like last year between Marika Trotter and Sanford Quinter and Peter. Actually, Peter Trump was there too, and they were talking about some like the contemporary work, right? And actually, Marika then showed a couple of images from my own work, right? And then Sanford's comment is, and I will never forget this. He said something like, "This is some kind of inchoate gestalt," which I thought was really fascinating. Inchoate gestalt, so something that is not there yet,
Yeah.
right? And I think there is a bit of that in what we're trying to say here, that we want to talk about things that are not there, not to point to things that everyone has theorized already, and it's available and you can learn it. And I think that's a difference maybe between what we're talking about. But
Yeah. And it's also because I think now we're not, and I'm talking about as in general, architecture students, teachers, we're not innocent anymore. We do not come to be disciplined. We're exposed to insane amounts of culture in all ways, shapes, and forms. we take 2 hours to select a movie on Netflix, or whatever platform is there to afford us, because there's so much of that. And then these things, so nobody is deprived of information.
Yes.
And I think this makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So it's not really, you're not going there to become educated, you're going there to have a conversation, with some people that you can, that you can talk to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. I think for me at least, that the conversation though is becoming problematic as a means of explaining our reason for actually doing things. And I think this is also what I want to do this with you, because I think we can't like figure it out or resolve it or something, but we can come closer to these questions at least in this kind of series. But I don't want to resolve it. I just want to be able to ask some questions that I think are important right now. And there's a lot of noise also coming from me, and I realize that now. That it's everywhere. The problem seems to be everywhere, but it's also difficult to focus, right? But it's not just a conversation. I think it has to be something more. It has to be some relevance that is cultural, architecture, or this kind of thinking has to play a role in the world. Otherwise, we are just deluding ourselves, I think. Otherwise, if we're not building, which we are not, right? I mean, this is specifically what I escaped from in my life, because I was building when I was in Serbia. I don't want to do that because I don't think it's actually that interesting to me personally. I think architecture is about ideas, about it has to do something with this way of thinking that has not been theorized or precisely theorized.
Yeah, I'm thinking of. I completely agree with this, right? Because for sure we're in this we're a lot of noise, but we cannot seem to stand upright in. But can you think of any cultural projects recently that would be doing something akin to this?
I mean, I was thinking honestly what the Rem is doing with the countryside exhibition. I think that he's still the smartest guy in the room, obviously, right? To my understanding, it's just when you see that, and I haven't seen the exhibition, but I have the catalog. It's really, really interesting what they're thinking about and how they're able to connect these different worlds and make that an architectural problem. And then the other thing that I saw just recently was I have heard the name of Andres Hake before,
right?
But I haven't seen his presentations before. But he was at SIARC virtually just 2 weeks ago. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah,
it was an incredible intellectual engagement with the world, and through architectural lens, very specifically through this idea of scale and moving from very small to huge, speaking from the points of view of different kinds of actors, animals, humans, walls, almost. It's kind of, I think he's a very smart designer. But although, I mean, if I compare that to Graham, I don't think I would like his architecture that much, just from the aesthetic point of view. It's not my cup of tea. But intellectually, I think this is it. This kind of way of being able to make those connections, as Ungers was saying, like analogies or things that no one can see from different domains. I was blown away by the lecture. I don't know if you saw that, but you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I haven't. I've never seen any of his lectures. Maybe once when Mark and Beatrice might have mentioned. Then Not
That's how I know his name from Market Batteries as well. But I didn't actually see any lecture by him before, so it was really an eye opener. But this is the one example. Like if you look at anyone else, it's just there is an incredible amount of just really damaging stuff. You know, people talking about ice cream and sandwiches. And that is like a disciplinary project because they are at Harvard. You know, that's a different kind of a thing that happens now. It's just this incredible amount of
this is all the
crap.
peer pressure. There's that, you know, not peer pressure, peer review, and of course peer pressure as well.
No, but people are now being funny. You know, that's the and it's not humor, as you said. It's actually there is something deeply sad about that because it's not really humorous. It's just I mean, I don't know actually them personally, so it doesn't. That's not the point. It's just that I cannot take that seriously. I'm sorry.
It really, these kind of things really make me think that we're so far away from any connection with humanity in general that we can't even crack good jokes anymore.
Exactly. Precisely. Yes. Precisely right. And it's not even that. It's just that the complexity of the world has rendered us you know, like into this like almost like catatonic state where we are either making self-contained jokes to each other, or we are world building on a large scale, you know, or we are doing how do they call that, parafictions.
Okay.
Or you know, like, and I think these are the ways of withdrawing from engagement and playing within that village square in the swamp for that kind of audience. And I think you and me are doing that as well, right? In our own way. We have a much smaller audience, but you know, but this is why I think the discipline needs to be taken outside of the throne room of the village and drowned in the swamp. Then once this happens, I think the swamp is gonna start drying out. And I'm sorry to use the one thing that I'm gonna say last. Sorry to use the swamp metaphor. It's kind of tied to that, you know.
Sad, we can't use words anymore. We can't drag this, that, yeah, whatever. Terrible stuff. No, but this is. So I recently read. I'm reading a lot of old shit nowadays, as you can tell. And then I recently read this small kind of pamphlet by Dante before he did the Divine Comedy, and it's called The Eloquence of the Vernacular. I put it here, and it's such a beautiful text. He stops it after the second book. He was supposed to do, I don't know, 8 or something, but then he stops it and then he goes and actually does it. So in the first one, he starts kind of bringing together the vernaculars from different regions and testing out their beauty and their eloquence in different ways. And in the next book, and that's all of the first book, he does that with all the vernaculars that he collected, I think 14 of them. And then in the next book, he starts to discuss genres. And then I really felt it was so. And then for genres, he looks back to history, and then for the vernaculars, he looks to today, his day. And it's super interesting to see how he manages to kind of establish all these different ways of talking, communicating into something that resembles a language, an inchoate gestalt. It's really beautiful. And because I think this is exactly what we're suffering from right now. You know, we have these vernaculars that are unable to communicate, not just within architecture, but within any kind of a disciplinary condition. You know, that structural engineers don't talk to like hydrolytic engineers, hydro engineers and then the ones concerned with this don't talk to that because they cannot function at all. And then you see in the, I think the biggest dictionary is what the French one that they release every year, the new edition for that. It has insane amounts of words added to it every year, which don't mean anything to anyone except perhaps two people in a certain, I don't know, clique of discipline. And then it's really bound to, this is, I think, what might be interesting to do as a theoretician or as in order to write some sort of a treatise that you start trying to work out some ways to construct a vernacular or to construct ways of how this can become eloquent in one way or the other.
Right.
But then again, he quits writing this book and then he actually does it.
You mean because he's credited as someone inventing the modern Italian language, right? And he does it through that book, through the work.
Yeah.
The Divine Comedy, but not through the treatise. Right.
Yeah, this is a strange event that happened. Yeah.
But do you think, like, just maybe, I mean, I'm really interested in that, what you said. And it kind of ties back into something I was thinking, that we are in the position maybe of the medieval man or medieval human when it comes to these new technologies and how they proliferate or how they produce effects in the world, that we are somehow replace the divine, the idea of the unknowable of divine with technology, or AI, let's say, which is quite literally sometimes thought to be kind of unknowable because we cannot understand the inner workings. Even if you're an engineer, there is a limit, let's say, to what one person can understand. So this is like interesting because in the same way as you're talking about vernacular and genres, I think we are now exposed to that, probably times a billion, because it's all international, online, everything is melted together. And there will be probably a creative act of some sort that's gonna propose a new, or a direction that doesn't resolve everything, but it kind of, there is a strong direction for culture. And this is, I think this is something that I'm trying to say. I think we can, or I think also you're trying to say too, like coming to the core of today's talk. I don't think the discipline is gonna give us that. I think there is something else, which I don't know what it is. I wish that I could come closer to that,
Yeah, some act of generosity somewhere. A major act.
But the act of conceptualizing it, like Dante did, like taking that into a cosmology, because that's what he did. He made a cosmology. Even it's a medieval idea, obviously, but he was able to wade through the swamp and kind of come up with a cosmological idea. And then Descartes did the same, but through his own other, and Alberti, I think, anticipated that. And he was an architect. I think there is a connection there to me. I think a new cosmology that if we can think about how to propose it in the age of AI and through this, that we don't fall back onto making fancy renders and talking about ice cream and being activists in the world and saying, oh, we can solve problems or something, So that's what I'm interested in. That's a big question of architecture for me. And the discipline is what is holding us back among other things.
I absolutely think so. Yeah, and just the retention of the ability to abstract. Just any idea of abstraction from things, from the real. This and disciplines kill these kind of more generalist ideas of life.
Right. Right? I think life as a concept is something that you can only find in literature. I think still, if you read like I don't know, we can talk about novels the other time, but I think maybe that's a good point that we can end with life. Maybe next time we can talk about, we can start talking about life and going again into other kinds of engagement. I don't know, but definitely.
This was good, huh?
Yeah, I think this is great, man.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. And
Interesting.
And to our audience, we will say thank you when we have the audience.
Are we putting it up?
I'm gonna stop recording right now.
Yeah, okay.